So, Nathan, for this next what if question, I got thinking back to when I was 18 or 19 years old and I had a part-time job, and I cut my thumb on a electric meat slicer and sliced the end of my thumb off, and was treated, and I've got my thumbs all as well there. But I was told the next day to come into work, and even if it was just for like 2 hours, to do some kind of modified duty. And I remember at the time thinking, like, really? I just like a night and a half ago, I cut my thumb. Like, geez. And the answer was, they had a really good explanation. It was partly for the purposes of minimizing the dent on their insurance, but it was also to keep the employee functional and engaged. You had a part-time employee who was only there a couple of days of the week, and they wanted me still to be engaged and still part of the team, and because studies do show that when you get back to work and you're in a timely manner, that you do better than if you're off work for a prolonged length of time. So it was like they just had it down to an art of like getting me back. I can't remember. It wasn't that long before I was back to my normal duties. But for the time that I had this bandage on and I needed modified duties, they had me with a pricing gun, labeling things on the shelf with one hand and scanning inventory and just doing anything that I could until I could get back to working with both hands. And so I got thinking about what if this applied to the healthcare setting or to the addiction setting, so that, when I went off work, I understand that there was an investigation. I understand that there was liability and that it wouldn't have been good or healthy for me to go right back to working with the general public where I was. But what if there was some way of keeping the employee engaged and a part of the workforce, and, even if it was a couple of hours a week, to come in and do something that needed doing, to make them feel that they were still a part of it. Maybe they still saw a couple of coworkers, and they were engaged, instead of this isolation, this really harmful isolation that we've talked about. Is this something that is possible? What do you think?
I think that's again another genius idea. I know that when you bring that up, and I think, how in the hell is this not being done? I know, like, in many industries, it's widely known that if you have an employee that's injured and it's not determined to be a long-term disability, it's better for everybody involved, but mostly the employee, to get that person back to work within a year.
Yeah.
That seems to be the time limit. If you leave that person away from the work setting for over a year, it increases the chance of all sorts of problems related to everything from re-injuring whatever the problem was in the first place, but mostly mental health issues, depression, anxiety, all these things that we know get worse when you lose that. I mean, people need to feel a sense of purpose. And I think for most of us, we probably underestimate the amount of connectivity we have when we're at work, right? The amount of just you see that person every day. You spend more time with this guy over here than you do your spouse, right? Like, I mean, those connections matter. And it seems odd to me that, like you said, I mean, I understand the liability as well, but there's just so many tasks that could be done. There's so many things in admin. I mean, you could be just walking around and checking on patients, or whatever setting you could be in where there was no liability risk. I'm sure they could find one. And wouldn't that be better than the current kind of setup where we end up with so many people just lost in the void? And I've seen it to where they're off for more than, I've seen people that kind of just strung along for a couple of years. 2 years turns into 3. They start talking about going back to work. Then the individuals, that makes them super anxious. All of a sudden they've got these other mental health concerns, and it turns into a permanent disability thing when maybe it never had to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, again, we're falling back into the question or the debate about like how much it's treated like an illness versus a punitive sort of response.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But either way, it would seem that the goal is the same, and that the goal is to get the person back. And I just think for myself, like even if it was 4 hours a week, like, that I was off on doing the treatment, doing all of the things I needed to do, participating in my own recovery. But if it was like 4 hours a week of going in and doing something at the computer, or making sure that my own courses and there's a certain number of computer proficiencies that you have to have up to date, and certificates and annual certificates to be renewed. If those could be done,
yes. You could be training at the very least. But it makes me think of that position that you were hoping to get there, Corey, and one that involved, I think it was working outside of the hospital setting, where you're working with people who are dealing or struggling with addiction themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just that it was such a no-brainer. As far as I was concerned, I thought, well, what would be a better way to harness this resource? So we know you're great at your job as a nurse. That's fine. But now you've got another kind of ability it's rare, and you kind of have to pass through hell to get it. And you've got that thing, and it could help that combination of skills is very rare. So you're sitting here, you want to do something, and here's this position that could, I'm sure you would have excelled at it, and you probably would have made a very real satisfactory, like you get that job satisfaction from it, and it would have had an impact on people's lives, and just no.
Yeah, no, exactly. No. Thank you. I was thinking about how for so many, and myself included, especially when I was, working as much as I was working, there's so much identity attached to that. There's so much meaning and purpose that we attach to that as human beings. Mm-hmm. And healthcare is certainly no exception to that. That there's a lot of meaning ascribed to people's jobs, and removing that entirely during the process of recovery doesn't make as much sense to me as it did when I started out. I remember, the first few weeks of being off work, thinking, oh, of course I need to be off work, and I need to be at home, and I need to get my act together here. And I did, but, and going back right away into the same work wouldn't have been good. But that lack of engagement, that lack of connection to a workplace, and the lack of feeling that I was actually like tangibly working towards getting back to work was harmful. And to me, it's actually counterproductive to what the endpoint should be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And some people would say, well, what are you complaining about? You're lucky you and get to continue there, that kind of thing. And I say, look, I totally understand where you're coming from, and that's a way that the employer could go too. But if the employer is going to go that way, then make that decision. That's it.
That's right. That's right. And I think back, like I was saying, to my 18 or 19-year-old self, and it was a part-time job. I was making like $8.80 an hour or something like that. Mm. And and didn't really, I could have found any other part-time job, but the employer was quite smart. And they said, like, it is in our interest to keep you here and keep you coming in and feeling like you're a part of it all. And I stuck around. I stuck around there for another year and a half after that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, it's interesting. I'm suspecting that was this a culture that was not European or endemic to Canada?
No, this was a large Canadian grocery chain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it seems like that's one thing our culture we're missing out on. We don't teach our kids enough about money. That's a huge problem. And we don't seem to put the same kind of weight on just understanding the importance of work, and understanding why work matters. And it's not just it's just not something you do for money. There's psychological reasons why humans benefit from being productive in their society and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and thinking of Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, that the people who, as he said, the people who survived in the concentration camps were people who found tasks, even if they were menial little funny things to do to fill their time. Those were the people who made purpose and found a way to get out of there. And I don't think the recovery thing is all that different. And so for me, my purpose has been different. It's come from doing this podcast and doing this with you, and also finding things around my home that needed repair, or that I could upgrade, or that I could work on, among other ways that I found purpose. But there are also a lot of people that don't have that, and who don't have those relationships, or don't have a home that's 80 years old that needs work, and so that finding meaning and purpose becomes more and more challenging, and they kind of sit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're missing the mark here, or we're missing an opportunity of actually helping people to thrive by saying, you're still in this, there's still work to be done, and there's still a purpose for you here.
Yeah. I think this way about life in general, but it seems that human beings have this in common with sharks, and that if we don't keep moving, we just have to keep moving towards something, right? If we don't do very well. And I think, I'm not sure how sharks do in captivity. I think poorly.
They do, I think.
Yeah. I think that once people, it's very damaging to the human psyche when there isn't a person loses if they've invested a lot in their identity, when it's tied to their career or job, they lose that. They lose the will to continue to hunt for purpose. I think that's probably the last thing before you basically come to a standstill. And once you are at a standstill, then it's like you're a magnet for mental illness. It's just without and you're right, using talking about, what was that? The Search for Purpose, or Meaning for Purpose. What was that book called?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning, right? That was something I never understood as a kid, and I never understood it in my 20s. It took a long time for me to figure it out. I just expected life to provide me with purpose,
Sure.
And it's not that way. Life doesn't. You have to put the work in towards something that means something to you.
Yeah.
And I'd taken that away from somebody, or getting in the way of it, and sometimes I think that's what's going on with some people. I know for a fact there's individuals who think they're going back to work, but the decision has already been made that they're not.
Sure.
So they're sitting there in this limbo, and I don't know why they do that.
No, I don't either. And the other thought that I had from the employee perspective is that it's daunting, the notion of going back to work. And there's oftentimes, I think quite commonly, anxiety there about how am I going to fit in when I go back? Mm-hmm. What are people going to think? What are people going to say to me? Is it going to be awkward? Those are very, very understandable questions, and questions that I had for myself as well, for sure. But if I was doing something, if I was going in still to do that computer coursework, or working in the basement folding linens, or whatever it could have been, I think that anxiety would have been lessened.
I agree with you. Yeah. And this is different, I think, than somebody who's dealing with some kind of traumatic stress. Obviously, under those conditions, with that condition, you are probably not going to want to get back to work, maybe ever. And if you do, it's going to take a special kind of a back to work type thing. But
sure,
that doesn't mean that you can't find purpose elsewhere.
Of course not.
And maybe there should be more kind of weight given to that factor, especially under these circumstances, because it's not like you're not really provided a manual for what to do when this happens as a healthcare professional, right?
No,
it's quite the opposite. You're kind of kept in the dark.
You are. Yeah, you are. And the isolation, being in the dark in isolation, doesn't help either. So to be able to see some people who understand and or people that God forbid, that would be helpful too.
Yeah. Good one. Really good one.